when we reach that point. Good morning. I see the sense of anticipation has been building. Welcome to the 14th program in the Examining Division's View from the Other Side. In many ways, we should bill this as the View from the Other Side, the special edition. Our guest is Jack Valenti, and I suppose that's all that needs to be said, but I won't let you or Jack off quite that easily. I could tell you all about Jack's education, his distinguished war record, the boards he sits on, the presidents he's advised, but that can't give you any real sense of how many people in this town rely upon his wisdom, on his good sense, and call him a friend. Jack is president, as you know, of the Motion Picture Association of America. He speaks for the creators of one of our most durable and valuable arts. As head of the MPAA, Jack remains what he has always been, a public man. In or out of government, Jack has always been in the business of searching out the public interest, trying to explain it in the clearest terms possible, and believe me, those terms are clear. I've listened to him on many an occasion, and then he fights hard for what he thinks is the right side of the issue. He's one of the number of remarkable men who came to Washington with President Johnson, such men as Jack, Bill Moyers, Harry McPherson, George Reedy, a tough, savvy, smart group of people with a bent for philosophy and a gift for words. I don't think there's been a group of political Washington insiders who have written at the level of these men. Blunt humor mixed with subtle observation. They come to grips with the big issues, but they don't lose sight of the human dimension. And I don't think you can understand the Johnson presidency without reading Jack's book called A Very Human President. He is the Washington insider's insider. When the record industry was looking for a new president, the search committee described very precisely the type of person they wanted. Quoting, "We want somebody like Jack Valenti," period. Jack has a reputation for getting things done. He has instant access to every office on Capitol Hill. He was the first to argue for the use of trade leverage to win copyright protection overseas. Back in 1982, he convinced Congress to make adequate intellectual property protection a prerequisite for benefits under the Caribbean Basin Initiative. He wanted to fight the theft of satellite signals in Jamaica. In fact, the story goes, in the midst of the invasion of Grenada, Jack got on the telephone with the White House and said, "No, Mr. President, you got it all wrong. I said Jamaica, not Grenada." Well, it is a pleasure and an honor to have him here today, and it's a pleasure to count him on one of the great friends of authors' rights and copyright. And it's also wonderful to count him as a generous friend of the Library of Congress. Without further ado, welcome Jack Valenti.
I like to believe that Ralph's introduction was marked by clarity and truth, and I found it suitable to my needs, a trifle brief perhaps, but other than that, it was superb. I was asked, I asked what I should be talking about, and I was told anything I wanted. I thought that I would spend a few minutes outlining what I think, where we're going, and maybe a brief measure of where we have been, and then you might want to ask some questions. Man and boy, I have been put upon by speakers at breakfasts, at lunches, at dinners, and mid-afternoons, And there's nothing more boring than somebody who tells you how smart he is for about 30 minutes and then leaves before you can undo some of the things he has done. Ralph is right in that copyright is the bone and blood and sinew of what we make and what we create. Without it, we are nothing. This would be an evanescent and transitory business unless we were able to nail down without obscurity and with durability the right of ownership. We are being besieged in the world today with an avalanche of new technology that beggars the imagination. We have are just beginning to move into this mine-laden territory of Western Europe and in Asia. And we are going to be dealing with these skeletal, magical devices swimming around in the atmosphere 23,000 feet above the equator in geosynchronous orbit. If you place two of them, one every 2 degrees, you're talking 180 satellites that will be floating up in that sky, hurling down at the speed of light, programmed by the long ton. And the big question is not how much entertainment and information it provides for a world which is eager for it, but how do you protect what you own? Because if you cannot protect what you own, you don't own anything. And there are a lot of people, including distinguished lawyers and even federal judges, who believe that copyright is a casual instrument, and that indeed all ideas that spring full-blown from the human mind ought to be available to everyone. And I have no quarrel with that. They ought to be. But it seems to me that if a man makes a table, it is his. And now he has given his labor, his creative design, and the table now emerges as something of worth, and he sells it. What leaps from the brain is as equally tangible as that which emerges as a table. And it is this distinction between the ephemeral and the realistic that causes the divergence of views in the world. When you go into a theater, you don't come out with a can of film under your arm. You go in and you pay for the right to view it. And if it is imprisoned in your mind and in your memory, you carry away with you that reel of film, unlike buying a car or something else. But one thing, the car will deteriorate in value, but your memory persists, and the value is always at the highest level that it was, and you can recall it at any time you want. It's that mingling of magic and creativity, the transportation to some distant place that for 2 hours you revel in. That is the distinction between the creative work and the table. Now, today, we have, when I first took this job, I did not realize how simple it was. My mandate was to preserve and enlarge the market for American creative material, and to make sure that whatever the creative mind produced, it could move freely and unhobbled around the world. That singular mandate is still in mind today, and we are battling it on several levels. Level one has to do with trade, and as Ralph, I think, correctly pointed out, we have been in the forefront of access. I have made one simple statement, and I'm proud to say that in the House Trade Bill, which is now moving through the House, for the first time in the memory of trade legislation, there is a section in there which specifically says that protection of intellectual property is part of the charge of this bill. We've never had that before. I have maintained that those businessmen who move with robust and unfettered freedom in our marketplace must provide us with the same kind of movement in theirs. Very simple, what I call the golden rule of trade. Do unto others what they have done unto you until what you're doing unto each other is fair. Now that's a pretty good paraphrase of it. We have been barriered in certain marketplaces around the world because of particularly countries like Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and only in one area, because Japan in a bizarre way is one of the freest markets for us. But Western Europe from time to time, certainly Latin America, and now Canada is about to become one of the great constructors of an unscalable trade cliff. I'll tell you what they're going to do. This shows you some of the problems that we face. The Canadians, in a bizarre burst of irony, in the middle of free trade talks with the United States, the Minister of Communications delivered a speech in Toronto 1 month ago and says that in April, next month, she will table, which in parliamentary parlance in Canada is not the same as in our country. Table means to move forward. A bill which would exile American distributors at the border of Canada. What this bill will say is that those American distribution companies who do not have worldwide rights for the films and video cassettes that they want to bring into Canada must stop at the border, unpack their knapsacks, and turn over all their goods to Canadian distributors, who will then, in a kind of an inequitable, magical disposal of our product, take that and move it through the Canadian marketplace. Now, worldwide rights means that, I don't know what worldwide rights mean, but it's assumed it means that you have every country in the world. Very few times, unless we actually own that picture, do our companies have worldwide rights. We pick up, that is, somebody makes a picture, and it may, the producer of that film, like Dino De Laurentiis, may sell off territorially the Italian rights, the German rights, the Brazilian rights, and then says to Paramount, I'd like you to distribute this film for me and the rest of the world. So we go out and distribute the film. We have a legal contract. But under the Canadian system now, that picture, even though we have an unassailable legal obligation to distribute that picture, we have to turn it over to Canadians. I need not tell you that we're going to fight this with every weaponry that we can summon. I find this an absolute, it would be comic if it wasn't so serious that the Canadians are doing this with a $24 billion trade surplus with us. It's the largest bilateral trade in the world, over $190 billion. And for the Canadians to do this is, to me, an exhibition of stupidity. But they're going to do it, and we're going to fight them. So trade is one aspect of the problems that we have. The second aspect has to do with technology. And that is, for example, in Japan, where we do have a free marketplace, and we have a trade surplus with Japan. We're one of the few industries that takes more money out of Japan than they take out of our country. It's an interesting thing. As a matter of fact, the U.S. film, television, and home video business brings back to this country annually about $1.2 billion in surplus balance of trade. So we are a precious trade asset that is shrunk only at the nation's peril. In Japan, where I have been the last 4 months twice, I mean, you really got to want to go to Japan to do 28 hours, 14 hours there and 14 back. So that's 28, that's 56 hours of flying time, and you may find that glamorous. I don't. At any rate, what's happening in Japan is that the theft of our video cassettes in Japan has reached a height that is now becoming malignant. We are losing at retail over $200 million a year because of lack of police enforcement of their copyright law. It's an easy way for a politician to please his constituency, and that is you allow them to have the finest of video cassettes in the world at about 1/4 the price of a legitimate cassette. So the Japanese public is very happy. They don't even know, for one thing, that they're using an illegitimate cassette until they actually play it on their television screen, and then they realize that the quality has been diminished. We are having, around the world, we probably lose about $1 billion a year in the piracy and theft, the illegal replication of that which we do, and the video cassettes. I have formed, in the last 10 years, an anti-piracy worldwide program. We've hired ex-FBI agents former inspectors of the French National Police and the former supervisor of Scotland Yard and policemen all over the world as part of a lawyer team that we have, and we're spending millions of dollars to try to stay this tide that threatens to drown us all. And what is needed? It's three things. You've got to have a strong copyright law. You'd be amazed at how many countries don't have it. Canada, again, and I don't want to beat up on Canada because I happen to like Canada very much, they don't have a copyright law that's worthy of the name. All of the Canadian cable systems will extract from American space American television signals, bring them into their cable systems in Canada, sell them to subscribers, and what do they pay American producers for the right to use those programs? Zero, zilch, because under Canadian law, they are not obligated to do so. Whereas, as Ralph knows, we pay Canadian producers, they get part of the Copyright Royalty Tribunal funds when cable systems use their material. It's a question of theft. You have to have a strong copyright law. You must have penalties where you can send somebody to the slammer on the first offense with sufficient fines. As Dr. Samuel Johnson says, when a man is about to be hanged, it does tend to concentrate the mind wonderfully. So if a fella knows that he's going to muck around with 100 or 200 cassettes, that he may do about 12 months hard time plus $250,000 fine, it makes his eyes smart a little bit. He's going to say, wait a minute, I may want to go into another business like mugging. I think I got a better chance. And then the third thing you must have is the will and the resolve to enforce the law. Japan has a wonderful copyright law, and they've got the greatest police force in the world. But they have been very lethargic. They have been very laggard in enforcing the law. So we have trade, we have the theft of our property is very important. And then you have new technology. You've got VCRs now that have a way of fetching out of a television screen copies of anything that they want. And we have been assaulted by the Supreme Court in its decision that it was, in the Sony Betamax case, that it was fair use. The term I don't have to, this is one of the few audiences, I don't have to tell what fair use is, for God's sakes. It is fair use to do what? To copy over-the-air broadcasts. Period. To most laymen and even lawyers, they don't look beyond that. They don't realize the Supreme Court never ruled on pay cable, and it never ruled on what we call back-to-back copying. That is, I go to my local video store, I get 2 movies, I bring them home, I hook up my other VCR, and by the way, over 20% of all American homes today have a second VCR. You hook them up, and I can copy. Well, my friends bring me out, may have 2. My friend had next door neighbor, he's got 2, so we copy them, and we now have 4 wonderful movies for our library, for which we paid $2 a night to rent, or $3 or $1, depending on which cut rate store you went to. And you can build a nice library that way. You can put 3 movies on one 6-hour blank tape. And so, what impact is that having? I have to be honest with you, not that I haven't been before, but I must confess to you that at this moment in time, I cannot certify to you whether or not the copying of our films in videocassette form and the availability of videocassettes in pre-recorded form is having a deleterious effect on the viewing of movies at the theater. In a strange way, if I had to say, is it helped or hurt, I might even say it's helped, because I don't know. All I do know are facts. In 1986, we had the second largest box office year in the history of the business, $3.8 billion. That's what is taken in at the box office. 40% of that will go back to the producer, 60% will stay with the theater owner. We are 42% penetrated by VCRs today. That is, 42% of all American homes have one of these magical Japanese devices. And more are getting them every day. What is the impact? In a strange way, well, first I would tell you that we are embarking on a long-range, detailed, expensive study of the behavior of VCR owners. We are in the... because we don't know. We really don't. The one thing about computers, a computer will do everything in the world for you, and I'm a great believer in computers now. But there's one thing a computer can't do. It can clickety-clack all the arithmetic, can do all sort of indexing, it can design motor cars and spaceships. But what a computer cannot do is chart for you human behavior. Cannot do it. And that's the one unknown, the inconstant, that really is at the heart of how a marketplace moves, what makes people do, the way they vote, the men and women they marry, what products they buy, how they go about choosing a motion picture. You don't know. And we're in such a crazy business. This is a business where every time you make a new picture, you start a new business that never existed before. You can't research it because by the time you finish the picture, you can't say, well, I'll make another one because the picture's done. You have to go with it. And even the most experienced people in our business, the best that we have, can watch a movie in what we call a fine print. That is before you've mixed the sound, where you can interlock it and watch the pictures and then have a second track where the sound is coming in interlock. And you watch this, and then when the picture is over, you ask a question. Is it going to hit or isn't it? And the answer is nobody knows until that magical moment when in a darkened theater, what appears on the screen collides with an audience. If sparks fly up, you've done what? You've done good. But sometimes they don't. And between the idea and the finished print, so much can go wrong and often does. And this is both the bane and the boon of the business. It's very unpredictability is what fascinates you. And besides, you're dealing with kind of interesting people, too. Somebody once asked me, he said, well, what's the difference you found politics in the movies? I said, well, when I was in the politics, I used to deal with Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey and Everett Dirksen on a daily and intimate basis. And today I'm dealing with Barbara Streisand and Raquel Welch and Linda Evans, unhappily not intimately, but I have noticed the difference. So, what we are trying to figure out is two things. How to make sure that what we have can move freely around the world without obstruction. And two, how do we protect it when it enters any marketplace? And trade, piracy, and new technology are the three elements that almost didn't exist. Trade always did, but the latter two are new intrusions. As I said, when I first took this job, it was easy. We just had television, you had movies, and the world was more or less a placid place. Today, it's a squirming mass of torment and turmoil, tumult everywhere. It's changing rapidly, and time is being compressed. Change would take a decade. Now change is taking 6 months. It's changed. The marketplace for television material changes almost weekly. It used to be you could go into syndication with a movie like Magnum or Miami Vice or Hill Street Blues and go from network into syndication. Today you can't give away an hour dramatic show. No station wants it. They want half-hour sitcoms. They want Cosby and they want the Newhart Show and they want things like that. Now, 6 months from now, when everybody's shoving sitcoms into the marketplace, people are going to start choking and regurgitating on that, and somebody's going to say, hey, how about Hill Street Blues and Miami Vice? Let's go back to 1 hour dramatic shows. Changing all the time. Well, I'm so fascinated by what I'm saying here that I could probably go on forever. But I just want to let you know some of the things we're trying to do, not only here but around the world. As you may or may not know, we have 7 offices abroad. We have offices in Rome, in Paris, and London. We're in Dakar, we're in New Delhi, and Rio, and Sydney, and Singapore. So we have offices which are manned by professionals whose aim it is to do abroad what we try to do in this country. So it's a global organization. I don't know of any association in Washington or in the country that is like the Motion Picture Association. It is worldwide, and it's not really an association because we only have 9 members. But the 9 members are really the U.S. film, television, and home video business. These are the ones who are the dominant forces in the world. And finally, I don't know of any other association where the product, and I use the word product warily, I find that a creative work, a movie, a program, a pre-recorded cassette, this is so fragile. It flies on gossamer wings, and you ought not call it a product or software. So let's just say a creative work. We dominate the world, the Americans do. 65% of all the box office in West Germany are American films. Can you imagine that 65% of all the films seen in this country were German? 95% of all the box office in Canada, which is what blows the Canadians' minds, goes to American films. 42% in Italy, 38% in France, 54% in Japan. It is the most wanted export of the United States. And that is why that which is so superior and dominates the world is a target for countries who want somehow to have their own native industry be dominant. And they figure if they can suffocate and strangle the American industry, that their own native industry will spring full-blown like Athena from the forehead of Zeus. That it doesn't happen and is a spurious notion in no way deters these countries from believing it and trying to practice it. On that jubilant note, let me just hesitate for a moment here and say, do any of you have any questions about this business? Yes?
Mr. Valenti, could you share your thoughts on colorizing classic black and white films, both the copyright point of view and the aesthetic point of view?
I'm like President Reagan. I don't know at what point I was told about this, and I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if I remember it. This is one of those issues which I have to tell you, and forgive me, I don't want to get political here, but it's kind of like school prayer, in that the long-term course of this nation, in my judgment, is not going to be determined about whether or not a child can get up in the 2nd grade and pray. They can pray without having it formal. But that's not, the course of the nation isn't going to be determined by that. It's going to be determined by how resolute is our attention to the economic underpinnings of this country and whether or not we can live in an absence of war. That's what our country is going to be determined by. Same thing with colorization. It's one of these non-issues that causes people, though, to fulminate. Now, I don't make public statements on this because it's a no-win situation. All of my dear friends who are directors and producers and writers, it's like taking a hot sword and ramming it up wherever you ram hot swords, and they go ballistics over this thing. My own feeling is that if I were running a studio today, I would colorize. But every living director, I would try to consult with him and let him help me make sure the colorization is in concert with his own views. There's no question that you've got the right to do it. One of the things that is not being said publicly is that the negative remains pristine and protected. The great classics, the Jimmy Cagney classics, the Maltese Falcon, let's take that, the John Huston with Humphrey Bogart. That is being colorized, has been colorized, I've seen it. But the negative is black and white. It is there. The original film is untarnished and untainted and unwounded, as it were. It's there. The fact is, though, that television stations will tell you that the Maltese Falcon today that they've played 40 times, they'll give you $300 for it. But a Maltese Falcon in color, they'll give you $1,500 for it. Now why? Television station owners are not in the eleemosynary business. They are not institutions of charity. They're doing it because you, or at least they believe their audiences, will watch more, and their ratings show that Maltese Falcon that's getting maybe let's say a 5 share or an 8 share, or a 5 rating or a 6 rating or whatever, when it's in color, it'll rise 2 points, maybe 3 points. And that's why we're coloring, not for any other reason. But if you go into a video store, many of the ones who have a large inventory will have a black and white Maltese Falcon, and they'll have a color Maltese Falcon. And so you, the public, you pay your money and you take your choice about what it is that you want, keeping in mind that the original film is as it was when John Huston made it. It is in black and white. That's about as far as I think I ought to go. Yes.
Were Canadian Broadcasting still trying to assure that a portion of the broadcasting time is devoted to national works for the Canadian authors?
Oh yes, the question was, do they have screen quotas is what you're talking about. Yes, all over the world we have screen quotas, where in Brazil 40% of screen time must be Brazilian pictures. Obviously it's not being enforced because if you're a Brazilian theater owner, you'd be out of business. There aren't enough Brazilian pictures, even bad ones. And there's some pictures, Brazilian, American, Canadian, where you have to subpoena people to see these pictures. Some of them are real bad. But we do have screen time. And in the citadel of liberty, whence came all of our common law and all of the buttress work of our democratic society, Great Britain, 16% quota on television time. Can't have more than 16% American films on television in Great Britain, of all places. Now, we live with that because sometimes it is honored more in the breach than it is in reality. Therefore, we live with that. We live with censorship, too, all over the world, which is sometimes blighted and stupid. But then that's part of the human failing. I think if we had censorship in this country, it'd be the same as it was anyplace else. But we have to live with those restrictions. There are two things every country wants. They want an airline and they want a movie industry. It's national pride. And that's why when you go to Kennedy Airport, you see all these cockamamie names of airlines you never heard of. But they only got 2 747, but by God, they got an airline. And, yes, we do live with those quotas all over the world.
So the distributors, thing that you were talking about in Canada, is just out of their protection for their national.
Well, there are no screen quotas in Canada, but simply because the Canadians make about 26 pictures a year. We make 400 pictures a year. Of that 400, about 175 are released by the major companies, so that the other 225 are regionally pictures. They're drive-in type things. They're the Iowa Combine chainsaw murder case and a lot of things that play on double bills and drive-ins. And if you'd see some of these pictures, some of the rating board that I have in California that, thank God, has to look at all these pictures and I don't, they get numbed after a while. You know, some of them are so terrible. The fellow must have awakened in the morning and said, "Today I'm going to make a lousy film," and by God, he did it. But the Canadians don't have that. They have an informal arrangement with the Canadian circuits, theater circuits, that they will give as much screen time to a Canadian picture as it deserves. But again, you don't want to keep a Canadian picture in your film when the Canadians don't want to see it. And as I told the minister and the prime minister in Canada, we don't put a bayonet in the back of Canadians and force them into to our pictures. They go to see our pictures because they want to. And I told the minister, I said, Minister, do you think that Canadians wake up in the morning and they say, today I want to see a Canadian picture? They don't say that. Any more than Americans say, I can't wait to see a French picture next week. They say, what's playing that's really good? And most people don't know the origin of a film. Oh, sure, some of our intellectual types that want to go to with the old Circle Theater and they scorn anything that's U.S. But to the average person of average intelligence, what he and she are looking for is an entertaining film that for 2 hours will make them gasp in astonishment or thrill or laugh or cry or whatever. It's storytelling. And that's a difficult thing to make people understand. They think, and I also said to the minister, I must have told her a lot of things I wasn't. I said, no parliament can command a good film to be made. And neither Mulrooney nor Reagan can order a public to go patronize a film. You know, this isn't a police state. Even the Russians can't keep their people out of American films. I remember when I was at the Moscow Film Festival many years ago, where I'm going again this summer, they were playing a picture with Jim Garner called Grand Prix. That's how long ago that was. And the Russians were standing 3 blocks in line to see this American film in the festival. And when I watched 2 Russian lads scalping tickets to Grand Prix, I knew we could conclude a treaty with the Russians. They were corruptible. And so I thought, my God, that's heartening. But they love American film. They love them. And any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What would you personally like to see done about home tapings?
What would be what?
What would you like to see done about home tapings?
Well, I really do think it's fair that any time that you copy off the air, that there ought to be something in the way of a copyright fee, not a compulsory license because I loathe the word, but say a blanket license that would say that for every blank tape that you buy, there's a 5-cent copyright fee. Now, every machine that you buy, there's a $10 or $15 copyright fee. Now, we have these in Europe. This is the video levy, as they call it. It's quite natural in Europe. The Europeans find this compatible with their own sense of equity, and there's nothing tumultuous about it at all. And so I think that would be useful. However, I've been in politics all my life, and I don't believe in taking my head and 27 times a day punching it against that wall. I just think that's kind of stupid. And I don't believe that we're going to be able to do that in the current climate, because if I were on the other side, and by the way, every time I get in a political fight, I never think of my own side. I always try to put my shoes in the opponent's side. And I'm saying, now, if I'm him, what am I going to do? Or if you want to talk to a senator or congressman, don't think about what you're going to say. Think about what he wants to know. And if you're a senator or congressman, I can almost tell you, just like we used to prep President Johnson for press conferences, we could tell what the press would ask. I can tell you what a congressman's going to ask. All I do is put myself in his shoes. And the minute he comes in is, well, how is that going to affect my people back home? Do you think it's fair they ought to be paying money to you rich Hollywood people? I just don't think that's right. We ought to have a tax on my people. Well, come on. I mean, you got as much chance as winning that battle as King Canute did when he held up his hands and tried to hold back the tides. But I think that it is possible that we can try to stop the copying by either bilateral or unilateral design in a video cassette machine. And that is, what I want to stop is the copying of pre-recorded video cassettes when you rent them at the store and bring them home. You can do that by having the VCR at the manufacturer's source, change the circuit, arm the tape with an electronic signal. So when somebody tries to copy that pre-recorded cassette, the tape collides with the circuitry and the copying is foiled. I would also like to see in pay cable or pay-per-view. I would like to see some kind of an electronic signal that would keep that from being copied. I think in the future, one of the new devices you're going to see is pay-per-view. And that is, in time, you will be able to, with a handheld computer or through your telephone, speak to another computer by dialing a number or punching in a number. And that computer will uplink with a satellite on one of the transponders. And you will say, I want to watch My Darling Clementine with Hank Fonda, John Ford's picture, Jack Ford. And the computer will tell the satellite, and it will beam down to your house, because you will have in your attic a little 1-foot parabolic dish that will be able to take that signal, and you will be able to see My Darling Clementine whatever hour you want. And the computer will charge you, and on the invoice you'll get $2.50, $3, $1, $5, whatever it is. Now, that is technologically feasible, and when you have enough addressable cable homes, you'll put that in. Right now, there are about 8 to 9 million addressable cable homes. Now, addressable means the ability of a cable home to communicate with a head-end. You have two-way communication. That is, I'm able to dial a number or a handheld computer at some other computer, some other number, and it communicates with my number. It's able to bill me, it's able to take my message, then it's able to respond and send me whatever it is I want to see. All of that is in the very, very imminent near future. And I think it's going for creative people. It will open up a whole new marketplace that did not exist before. Somebody had there. Yes, sir.
I have a question. A lot of films are being lost because they don't consider it financially feasible to show older films, for instance. So a lot of this is not being promoted, and as a result of that, it's shown, and the film is getting lost. Is there any answer to that?
Well, I don't know that the film's getting lost. We've been very, very attentive these days, as we weren't 40 years ago, in the preservation of film. And indeed, as Dan Burstein knows in the Library of Congress, where we are going from taking nitrate and going to non-inflammable material, to acetate. There are a lot of films, if you mean that don't get a large release date.
Well, it's just that the TV people and film people are more interested in video and everything else and showing something in the last 10 years than they are something that's 30 years old.
Well, all of this, I assure you that I have yet to meet a producer or a studio or anybody in our business who isn't really ready and willing to fill a consumer need. If they think that their people want to see something, it's available, because that's our business. We have a library. The riches of the motion picture, television, video business is in your library. That which you have created, and it's there. It's like books. You rent books, you have library books. Our business is our library.
How do those consumers make their wants known?
Well, you make your wants known by telling your television station what you'd like to see. Oftentimes, television stations do surveys about what their customers want, or cable system, or your local theater. If enough people want something, it's there. There is no deliberate attempt to shut off the gateway between that library and you. That's our mission in life, is to make sure that people get to see whatever it is that we have that we think they want to see. And why the video store has done it is now, instead of having to go to the television station, you go to the video store and you ask them, as I did the other night, I wanted to see Fort Apache, the old Jack Ford movie with Duke Wayne. And I'm talking to this 20-year-old kid there who says, oh yes, we got it, and he gave me the movie, and as I went out, I looked at it, it has Fort Apache, the Bronx, the Paul Newman movie. And I go back and I said, no, you don't understand. I want Fort Apache with Duke Wayne. And he said, Duke Wayne, is that a movie? And I thought, well, we got what we have, as they said in Cool Hand Luke, I said, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And I said, no, this is John Wayne. John Wayne. John Ford. Well, the point is, though, we finally found it. They had it in their inventory, Ford Apache, which was made 40 years ago. So what the video store is doing now, particularly in the big ones like Arrows, the ones that you have 3, 4, 5, 6,000 title inventory, there's some 20,000 titles available to you that you can go to those stores and get old movies. And it's easier than doing it on television, where you have to use up 2 hours of television time in a day. That's 2 hours out of 24. Sometimes television stations don't want to do it. But Channel 5, Channel 50, Channel 20, if you notice, in this town are playing old movies all the time. I mean, that's their staple. That's their menu. And they do it inexpensively.
But there are still lots of films that from certain studios that are never released.
Well, that's not true. Now, we have films that are unreleasable. That is, they are so bad. This is true. You'd be amazed by some big stars, and when it's done, I'll tell you one, Enemy of the People, the Ibsen play. In the latter part of his life, Steve McQueen decided he wanted to play Dr. Stockman. It was the most misappropriation of talent that you ever saw in your life. This is, if he's Dr. Stockman, I'm Moses Malone, for God's sakes. And I sure as hell ain't Moses Malone. Same height, but other than that, we are. Enemy of the People. Warner Brothers made this movie because Steve McQueen is their big star. Cost about $8 or $9 million. And when it was done, they couldn't even get their employees to look at it. True story. Enemy of the People is on a shelf right now because it's just a bad, bad movie, and they didn't want to spend $2 on the promotion of this film. Now, other than what we call unreleasable films, and almost every star has had one, it's something he wanted or she wanted to do that was inappropriate, and they did it. But other than that, I don't know of a single film that's not available, because these studios, they don't make $1 on a film sitting in their vault. If they keep it moving around, they make money out of it.
I think maybe we should cut it off after the next question.
Mr. Valenti, I'd like your views on the registration system.
On what?
Copyright registration.
Copyright registration?
Or the deposit requirement, too, you might comment on that. The requirement that you deposit copies of
Oh, yeah, yeah.
the copyright office, not that you register to get trouble down.
Yeah, I've always been a believer that I think you ought to register everything, and you ought to deposit. I believe that. And you don't need to deposit a $1,500 print if you don't want to. But to me, anything you can do to make your copyright ownership more braced and knit and lace it together tighter is very important. And therefore, we ought to do it. Now, we have a lot of problems abroad in that, where they want you to deposit film, but not for copyright purposes. They want you to do it cinematheque purposes and a lot of other things. We find that all over the world, and we'd be out of business if we adhered to a lot of it. But as far as copyright registration, I'm very much for it. Now, there's some dissenting voices in this. And everybody's is not for it for varying reasons. But I'm a great believer that unless you nail down the first principle of ownership, that you're in big trouble. I think I better stop here. I saw one fellow out there looking at his watch, and then he started shaking it, and then I knew I was in trouble. Thank you, Ralph.